Plato was an illustrious Greek philosopher whose writings, which have survived to this day, have rendered his ideas immortal. Plato was born in Athens around 427 or 428 BC and came from a noble family. His father was Ariston and his mother was Perictione. The philosopher had two brothers, Adamanthus and Glaucon, and a sister called Potone. His father died when the thinker was still young, and after his death, Perictione remarried, and from this union Antiphon was born. Few people know that Plato was a nickname. The famous philosopher's name was Aristocles, the same as his grandfather. Plato comes from the Greek Platon and means great or broad. This nickname was given to him by his wrestling coach because of his physical size. Plato lived during a politically turbulent period in Athens when the Peloponnesian War took place, a conflict between Athens and Sparta. He also witnessed the period when Athens was defeated by Sicily and witnessed an important political change, when democracy lost ground to oligarchy. This hectic time was certainly an influence on his musings on ethics and politics. Plato received a good education in his childhood and youth. He studied a variety of subjects such as music, history, geometry, and arithmetic, among others. Throughout his youth, he excelled athletically. In his early philosophical studies, through contact with the contemporary Cratylus, he gained an interest in the pre-Socratic Heraclitus of Ephesus, and later also studied the philosophers of the Eleatic school, including Parmenides, who was of particular interest to Plato. At around 20 years old, Plato became a pupil of the remarkable philosopher Socrates. The master had a peculiar demeanor to his contemporaries, dressing shabbily and frequenting public places, where he questioned the most diverse individuals. Plato became Socrates' pupil, and although his master wrote nothing down, his faithful apprentice noted much information about him. Today, a great deal of what we know about Socrates' life and work comes from the works of his pupil Plato. Plato was interested in pursuing a political career, but when his master Socrates was sentenced and executed, he became deeply disillusioned with the local government and began to chart another course for his life. After Socrates' death, Plato left his hometown and moved to Megara, a city west of Athens. In 388 BC, when he was about 40 years old, he spent a period in Italy, where he tried to establish contact with the Pythagoreans, followers of the philosophy founded by the pre-Socratic Pythagoras of Samos. Around the same time, he also went to Cyrene, now Libya, and to Egypt, a particularly important country, where Plato came into contact with and gained knowledge from local sorcerers and prophets. But the documents about the philosopher's visit to these two places are uncertain. On one occasion, while in Italy, Plato met the tyrant Dionysius I, who invited the philosopher to visit Syracuse in Sicily, hoping that the Athenian thinker would become his personal advisor. Plato hoped to present his thoughts and influence the ruler with his political philosophy. But the relationship between the two quickly became troubled, with uncomfortable disagreements between them. Dionysius I became so angry with the Greek thinker that he sold him as a slave to a Spartan from Aegina, an island near Athens. But Plato escaped with the help of Arete of Cyrene and returned to Athens. During this troubled time in Italy, Plato became friends with the Greek philosopher Dion, a relative of Dionysius I. Plato's return from this first trip to Sicily was important. At around 40 years old, he founded the philosophical school called the Academy near Athens. The name Academy comes from Academos, an important Athenian hero. The place was associated with the Muses, entities bound to the god Apollo, one of the main and most worshipped deities in ancient Greece. Plato is said to have charged nothing to those who frequented the place. Another interesting fact is that at least 2 women are believed to have taken part in the meetings of this philosophical school. In his written documents, Plato explored different areas of philosophical research, such as epistemology, politics, metaphysics, ethics, and aesthetics. Among the many aspects of his philosophy, the most important and well-known are the theory of forms and the myth of the cave. The theory of forms is one of the cornerstones of Platonic philosophy. This topic not only appears in one book, but in several of his texts. Plato considers there to be two realms, where the plane he calls the spiritual realm is characterized by being immutable, eternal, and stable. But the physical realm, the one we apprehend through our senses, is defined by how mutable things are. This is the world of appearances, of imperfect copies of what exists in the spiritual realm, where essences, truths in themselves, are to be found. In other words, in the spiritual realm, things are absolute. But on the second plane, in the physical realm, they only exist in appearance because their primary roots are in the spiritual realm. That which exists in the sensory sphere is a copy of that which pertains to the spiritual realm. The true cause of things in the physical realm is suprasensible. In other words, everything that exists in the world in which we live is a shadow of what occurs in the spiritual realm. To illustrate this thought, Plato wrote the famous myth or allegory of the cave. We may imagine a cave with several prisoners who, since birth, have been chained there, facing only in one direction, seeing shadows cast by objects behind them, lit by a bonfire. These prisoners believe that the shadows are reality. When a prisoner frees himself and leaves the cave, he is initially dazzled by the sunlight and true reality, but he understands and accepts this new perspective. He learns that the shadows he saw before were not things in themselves. The man returns to the cave to share what he has discovered, but the other prisoners ridicule him and refuse to believe his words. They remain inside, deluded, believing that the shadows were the truth itself, without knowing that the things themselves were not in that place. In this metaphor, the physical realm is the cave, and the spiritual realm, that is reality itself, the source of everything related to the physical sphere, lies outside the cave. This allegory may also be interpreted in unusual ways, and is even associated with other aspects of Platonic philosophy, such as gnoseology, ethics, and politics. Although important, the theory of forms and the myth of the cave are only part of Plato's extensive and complex work, which covers studies on aesthetics, morality, reflections on love, and other subjects. In 367 BC, Plato returned to Sicily. He tried to develop contacts with Dionysius II, who had succeeded his father. This was because the tyrant Dionysius II had developed a taste for philosophy and wanted to study with him. But, as had happened years before, Plato's time in Sicily was frustrating, and the meeting with the stubborn Dionysius II was not fruitful, and disagreements arose between the two. But that wasn't the end of Plato's time in Sicily. In 361 BC, the Greek thinker returned to the city, now accompanied by his students Xenocrates and Speusippus. There were further disagreements, and the philosopher almost died trying to deal with the authoritarian Dionysius II, whose barbaric behavior remained unaltered. His friend Dion eventually won power, but was assassinated in 353 BC. In 360 BC, Plato returned to Athens, where he remained busy until his death. Plato died in approximately 347 BC, aged around 80, and was supposedly buried in or near the grounds of his philosophical school. Plato's academy was destroyed in 86 BC by Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a Roman officer who conquered the Greek city that year. Not only was the academy destroyed, but other parts of the city as well, such as the Lyceum, the philosophical school founded by Aristotle. Even after the academy was destroyed, the Platonic school continued to be taught, until it was closed down in 529 AD by order of the Roman Emperor Justinian. In the 20th century, the location of the academy was found and is now an archaeological site that can be visited free of charge by tourists. Plato's vast philosophical legacy influenced other renowned names in the history of philosophy. Aristotle was one of the academy's students for almost 20 years and was hugely influenced by his teacher Plato. In 250 AD, the Greek Plotinus launched the Neoplatonic school, where he studied and reinterpreted Plato's philosophy, which then resurfaced. Along with Plotinus, many other thinkers, such as St. Augustine, Porphyry, Bergson, or Arthur Schopenhauer, were influenced by the famous works of Plato, one of humanity's leading geniuses, whose books continue to be translated into multiple languages, drawing readers and researchers from all over the world. Some of his most famous works include The Republic, Symposium, Phaedo, Theaetetus, and Phaedrus. Plato's name is widely recognized even by those unfamiliar with philosophy, and his teachings continue to influence new generations of thinkers.